During my later high school years, I worked as a regular pizza delivery driver. Since I had school during the day, I typically worked the night shifts on Fridays and Saturdays. The job was pretty relaxed, and most of the time I was either driving around or inside the shop answering calls. A couple of my buddies worked there too, so I always had someone to chat with during shifts. Anyway, it was a Friday night and I had just returned from my last break. The shop closed at 1 a.m., but we usually stopped accepting new orders by midnight so we'd have enough time to clean up before heading out. It was about 11:30 at that point, and I figured I'd get a head start on cleaning to kill some time. Only me and two other friends were working that night. One was wrapping up a delivery and the other had just gone on break right after I returned. A few minutes into cleaning, the phone rang. I answered and asked how I could assist the caller. An older man was on the line asking if we were still delivering. I told him we were, but we weren't accepting any large orders anymore. He said that was fine, requested a regular pizza, and gave me the delivery address. Around 15 minutes later, the pizza was ready. I packed it up, hopped in my car, and hit the road. The address was a little over 10 minutes away. I was about halfway there when I pulled up behind a car sitting at a stop sign on a deserted road. I waited a few seconds, scanning around to see why the car hadn't moved. I gently honked the horn, thinking maybe the driver had dozed off or was distracted. Still no movement. So I began to pull around him, but just as I did, he suddenly accelerated and sped off down the road. It was a little frustrating, but I figured he was just messing around and didn't think much of it. A few minutes later though, I passed the same car pulled over to the side of the road with its headlights off. As I drove by, I got this uneasy, creeping feeling, like something just wasn't right. I checked my mirrors frequently the rest of the way to ensure he wasn't tailing me. Eventually, I turned onto a long driveway that stretched through a wooded area, leading to the delivery address. I parked in front of the house, double-checked I had everything, and walked up to knock on the door. After a minute or two, an elderly woman opened up and asked why I was there. I told her I was delivering a pizza and repeated the address I'd been given. She looked confused and told me that no one at her house had ordered anything. I could tell she felt bad about the mix-up. I thanked her and headed back to my car. Situations like that weren't all that unusual. Sometimes people prank us or just provide the wrong address by mistake. I figured I'd pull out of her driveway and call my friend at the shop to double-check the order and confirm the address. As I was driving back down the long driveway, bright headlights suddenly shone directly into my eyes. The light was intense, and I could immediately tell it was a car headed in my direction. I quickly hit the brakes. I waited for the car to either turn off the lights or back out, but after sitting there for a bit, it became clear they weren't planning to move. I didn't know what to do since the headlights were blinding and the driveway was too narrow to drive around them. I decided to sit tight and wait to see what move they would make. About a minute passed with neither of us moving. Then the car's headlights shut off completely. I paused, allowing my eyes to adjust to the darkness. Once I could see better, I tried to look ahead to spot the car, but I couldn't see it at all. Cautiously, I put the car back in drive and slowly began moving down the driveway, alert and nervous in case they started driving again. Just a few seconds later, I saw the same car again, this time parked in the middle of the driveway with its lights still off. I recognized it immediately as the one from the stop sign earlier. Somehow, he had followed me without me noticing. It was too dark to see inside the car and I started feeling anxious. There could have been multiple people in there and I didn't like the possibilities. Then the driver's door opened and a man stepped out, walking towards me. He stopped halfway and started waving at me like he wanted me to pull up next to him. At that point, I was genuinely freaking out inside. I tried to stay calm and cautiously pulled my car up beside him. The strange thing was, when I did, he didn't say a word. He didn't even look at me. Instead, he began walking around my car, finally stopping behind it near the trunk. I stared into the rearview mirror, trying to figure out what he was doing and why he was just standing there. As I kept watching him, something suddenly clicked in my head. I whipped my eyes back to the front of the car, just in time to see the other 3 doors of the suspicious car swing open. 3 more men jumped out and sprinted straight toward my car. My adrenaline kicked in. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, rocketing forward and nearly hitting one of the guys. I swerved off the driveway, dodging trees and branches, finally making it back onto the main road. There was no one else out on the road, so I had a clear view in my rearview mirror when the car pulled out behind me and began following. I panicked, knowing they wouldn't stop unless I found a more populated area. But after about 30 seconds, they suddenly turned onto a side road. I drove straight back to the shop and told my friends what had just happened. They urged me to call the police and report it, even though I didn't have much helpful information. A police officer came by, took my statement, and left shortly before we closed for the night. To my surprise, I got a call the next day informing me that 3 of the men had been caught. They'd attempted to rob another car in the exact same driveway later that night. Apparently, the elderly woman had called the police after 2 more drivers showed up at her house with food she didn't order. Turns out, the group had been using that isolated driveway, surrounded by woods, as a trap to lure delivery drivers and rob them on their way out. Sadly, the 4th guy escaped by running off into the forest. I never got any updates about him, so I still don't know if he was ever caught. The old lady insisted she didn't know about them and had never seen them in her driveway before that night. Honestly, the whole thing was wild, and I'm thankful I was able to act fast and get out without being hurt. That experience definitely made my job more nerve-wracking, and shortly after, I managed to switch to daytime weekend shifts only. I still hope that last guy got caught, because who knows how many others could have ended up in terrifying situations because he got away. Story 2. During my first few years in college, I worked as a food delivery driver. I mostly did deliveries through apps like DoorDash and Uber Eats. I wasn't a fan of making small talk with strangers or having random people in my car, so I always preferred delivering food instead of being a typical Uber driver. I kept at it for over a year and didn't really face any problems, aside from the occasional angry customer who blamed me for the restaurant messing up their order. Anyway, it was a late Wednesday night, and since I didn't have any early morning classes, I figured I'd try to make a little extra cash by doing some deliveries. I completed 4 or 5 quick orders and found myself about 20 minutes away from my dorm. It was around 1 a.m. and I thought it'd be a good time to wrap things up and head back. The way those delivery apps work is you just drive around and wait for a random order to pop up. It shows you how far the delivery is and how much you'll earn, then you can decide whether to accept or decline it. On my way back, I left the app running just in case a really quick and easy order showed up nearby. A few requests came in, but they were too far and didn't seem worth the time or gas. Then, just as I was pulling into my dorm, another request popped up. This one was about 12 miles away, but the payout was surprisingly high, higher than anything I'd seen before. I paused for a moment to consider it. The distance was a little far, but the money being offered was just too much to ignore. So I accepted the request and started following the GPS to the restaurant. After a few minutes, I got there and double-checked the order on my phone to make sure I was picking up the right items. As I walked into the restaurant, I saw the customer had only ordered 2 items, and the total came out to a little over $6. That was odd. Usually, when someone offers a large tip, it's because they ordered a ton of food or something expensive. But this was a tiny order. That meant the big payout was purely from the tip. I picked up the food and headed back to my car. On the drive over, I kept trying to figure out why someone would leave such a big tip on such a small order. It felt a little strange, but I eventually told myself it might have been an accident, or maybe they were just being really generous. Even though it wasn't too far from campus, I had never actually been to that particular area before. It was a really nice neighborhood, full of gated communities and massive houses. Fortunately, the customer's house wasn't behind a gate, so I was able to drive right into the neighborhood. As I passed by some of the homes, I started to understand the tip more. These people clearly had money. The street was long, and I was only a couple of minutes away from the house when I got a message from the customer through the app. They told me to make sure I delivered the food to the correct address once I arrived. I figured maybe their house looked too similar to their neighbors, so when I pulled up, I sent a message with a quick description of the house and asked if that was the right one. They responded with, "No." I waited, assuming they'd give me a description of their house instead, but nothing. So I texted again, this time describing their neighbor's house. Once again they just replied, "No." Now I was starting to get frustrated with the guy, so I tried calling him instead. But he kept declining the call. It would ring a few times, then he'd hang up. I double-checked the address and pasted it into Google to see if I could find a clearer answer there. That's when I noticed something strange. The address had an unusual number format, one I hadn't seen before. It had a subset of numbers and I wasn't even sure what it meant. I zoomed in on the map and saw that the address wasn't pointing to one of the houses, it was right between 2 of them. Looking closer, it seemed like there was a small garage or maybe a shed tucked away in between. It was barely visible. I looked up from my phone and shifted my gaze between the houses. Sure enough, I spotted a small garage-like structure just a few feet away from the house the app originally led me to. I honestly didn't know what to expect, or why anyone would live in a place like that. But I had already come all this way, so I wasn't going to back out now. I got out of the car and made my way toward the structure. As I walked up the driveway, I could clearly tell what the building was. It was basically a large storage garage, probably meant for housing an old car or extra stuff. There wasn't a normal front door though, so I placed the food bag down near the garage door. Just as I was pulling out my phone to take the required delivery photo for the app, a man appeared from around the right side of the garage. He didn't say anything, just stood there and stared at me. He was really giving me the creeps, so I said, "It's right here for you, sir," while pointing at the bag and slowly backing away toward my car. Then he said something that made my stomach turn. He told me that wasn't where he wanted me to leave it. I turned around and noticed he still hadn't moved an inch. Sorry, where did you want me to put it?" I asked, now seriously uncomfortable. He pointed to the back of the garage and said the door was over there. At that moment, I knew for sure there was no way I was following him behind that building. I stood there in silence for a second, then muttered, "Sorry," and quickly walked back to my car. Before driving away, I glanced over one last time. The man was walking behind the garage, but he hadn't picked up the food. I left the neighborhood, shaken up the whole drive back to my dorm. The entire encounter had been deeply unsettling. The fact that it happened in such a wealthy area made it all the more bizarre. The more I thought about it, the more off everything seemed, especially how he'd made it clear that I wasn't supposed to deliver to the main house, and that he refused to accept the food unless I followed him to the back of the garage. I had never called the police before in my life, and I didn't end up calling them this time either. A part of me wondered if maybe he was just a weird, socially awkward guy. Still, it haunted me for a few days, but I eventually moved on and kept doing deliveries in my free time. Nothing strange happened again, until a couple weeks later. A big order popped up on my app, and the delivery area was the exact same neighborhood. I immediately declined it. But I couldn't stop wondering who ended up taking that order, and what happened to them when they arrived. Story 3. It was the beginning of fall, and I was working as a cashier at a small store not far from my apartment. My regular shift would end around 9 p.m., and after that I usually spent a couple of hours doing food deliveries before heading home. I actually enjoyed doing deliveries at night. The roads were quiet, and since most delivery drivers prefer daytime shifts and often grab the majority of the orders, I usually found myself getting more opportunities late at night. On this particular evening, I had just finished my shift and opened the delivery app to start my side hustle. The first order came through quickly and was done in about 15 minutes. After that, I waited a few minutes before getting another request. This one offered a solid payout, and the delivery location was about 20 minutes away from where I was. I drove to the fast food spot to collect the order, then began heading toward the delivery address. The town I live in isn't very large and has quite a few empty lots and open land. The main town center, where my apartment and most of the restaurants are, is fairly active, but drive 10 minutes out, and you're surrounded by farmland with homes spaced far apart. Most of my deliveries were within the town area, but occasionally I'd get one that took me further out into the farm country. I assumed this was one of those cases and expected the delivery to be to a farmhouse, considering the 20-minute drive. However, the app stated the address was in a small neighborhood right off a minor highway. That was a relief. Delivering to isolated farmhouses at night always gave me the creeps, so I was glad this one seemed to be in a more populated area. After exiting the highway, I made a left and started heading down a road that would take me to the neighborhood. Almost immediately, though, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. I declined it, thinking it was probably spam. But the same number called again just seconds later. Assuming it might be the customer, I answered. "Hello?" I asked. There was silence on the other end, so I hung up. Moments later, the same number tried again. I picked up, and this time a man finally spoke. He told me I had turned the wrong way. I was confused and told him the map showed I was heading the correct direction. He replied that his address often gets misrouted in the delivery app, and he always has to give drivers instructions to find his house. I said okay and asked him how to get there. He explained that when I got off the highway, I should have turned right instead of left, then taken the third left turn onto a gravel path that would lead to his farmhouse at the end. I said I'd be there shortly and turned the car around. It wasn't unusual for customers out here to call and give extra directions, especially if the road wasn't clearly marked, so I didn't think much of it. I passed the highway turn-off again and continued until I found the third left he mentioned. I turned onto a gravel path that quickly disappeared into a small patch of forest. The trees thickened around me and it became pitch black. I've never liked being in wooded areas at night. As I drove slowly down the path, I started to get anxious. That's when I began questioning how strange it was that the GPS had led me in the complete opposite direction from where this man claimed to live. Still, I tried to push those thoughts aside, telling myself I was just overthinking because of the dark surroundings. A few minutes passed and there was still no sign of a house. I started wondering if I'd turned onto the right path at all. The road was narrow and lined with trees, making it nearly impossible to turn around, so I figured I'd continue to the end. If I didn't find anything, I could call the guy and figure it out from there. Another minute or two went by before I finally reached a clearing. The road widened into a small circular driveway next to a house. I pulled up toward the front entrance and parked near a for sale sign that stood in the yard. That threw me off. I wasn't sure if I was at the right place. But then I looked toward the front door. It was open and I saw someone waving to me from deeper inside the house. Assuming this was the guy, I grabbed the food and headed to the porch. As I stepped up and knelt down to place the bag, I saw the man again, standing in a hallway leading to the kitchen. He asked me politely if I could bring the food to the kitchen counter, then quickly walked away. A second later, I heard the sound of the sink turning on. A little unsure, I stepped inside and looked around. The house was filled with antique furniture and outdated decor, but it all looked unused, almost like a display or a place no one had lived in for a while. I cautiously walked down the hallway and into the kitchen. When I arrived, I noticed the sink was still running, but the man was nowhere in sight. That sent a chill down my spine. I dropped the bag on the counter as quickly as I could and rushed back toward the front door. As I stepped outside, I heard the man yell something after me, but I couldn't make out what he said. I jumped in my car, threw it in drive, and sped off down the gravel road without looking back. I didn't stop until I reached the parking lot outside my apartment. That's when I finally looked at my phone and saw multiple missed calls from the same unknown number. I blocked it right away. Then I opened the delivery app to end my shift, but noticed I had a few new messages from the actual customer. They said I'd taken a wrong turn and hadn't delivered the food to the right address. My heart dropped. I froze, realizing that the man who had called me wasn't my real customer. I had just walked into a stranger's house, completely unaware. I contacted the police immediately and gave them the entire story. An officer came by my apartment shortly after to take a statement and go over the details. I had no idea how the man knew I was out on a delivery or was able to track my location. The officer told me that it was very likely my phone had been hacked, and the man had been monitoring my movements. That sent a wave of unease through me. But the worst part? The following day, I was informed that the house I had entered was vacant. It had been on the market for months and the previous owners had moved out long ago. The man must have gotten inside through an unlocked window. As of now, there's been no update. The police haven't found any solid leads that might help identify the guy. That leaves me feeling incredibly unsettled. I don't know what his intentions were, but I think it's safe to say he wasn't planning to just chat. I try not to dwell on it too much, but late at night, I often replay the whole situation, thinking about everything that could have gone horribly wrong.